You're listening to the Do Something More podcast, and this is episode 16 on why you should thank an elected official. Welcome to the Do Something More podcast, a service-oriented show where we highlight the helpers who inspire us all to do something more. I'm your host, Melissa Draper. Thank you so much for being here. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's great to have you here listening to another week of Do Something More. And I'm super proud of this podcast because we've been going for 3 months now. Releasing a new episode every week for 3 months, I think, is a good accomplishment. Feels good to me, and I'm grateful for each and every download and listen that we get. So thank you so much for downloading the show, taking the time to listen. And I would just love to make one request that if you've been listening to this podcast, if you've been enjoying the content that you hear here, please go ahead and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Leave us a review and tell us what you think so far. Tell me what you think so far about the podcast and what you've enjoyed about listening to it and some of the episodes that you've enjoyed listening to. So take a few moments, doesn't take long, but truly makes a difference for me on this side of producing and hosting this podcast. So today, though, we are going to be talking about why you should thank an elected official. And this episode is dropping on July 4th, Independence Day, that we celebrate here in the United States. So I thought this was a great thing to be talking about because of the democracy that we have here. We have the opportunity to elect officials and people to represent us, not only in the federal government, but at state government, local government, and even in things like our schools or our HOAs. So we are surrounded by elected officials. And just thinking about why it's important to take the time to thank one of them for their, or any of them, or all of them for the service that they give. I think, first of all, we've been talking about on the podcast the power of our words and using them to serve and to uplift others. But in our world today, especially with social media and the news media's 24-hour cycle that's just constant, bad-mouthing, criticizing, demeaning elected officials or anyone that doesn't agree with us is what sells. It's what's popular. It's become a pretty standard thing to do. And when we can take the time instead to focus on the positive and to recognize the good that they are doing, I think that can just make a world of difference in our world and in the way that we view things ourselves, but also the way things function. And I don't think that means that we shouldn't hold our elected officials accountable. We definitely should. And there are, of course, appropriate times and places and ways to share our viewpoints and concerns with our elected officials, or to let them know what matters to us as the people they're representing. There's definitely an appropriate place for that. But I think there's an appropriate place for thanking them as well, for the good things that they are doing and for recognizing the good that they are doing for us, the people that they represent. I have a little story, of course, that I want to share along with that idea. Many years ago, I was talking to a friend and neighbor who had recently retired from overseeing all of the busing for the school district. She was a manager of that and worked with that for many years, and was just reflecting and saying how many times in her position she had to deal with the problems or the complaints or the things that happened. And she was acknowledging, of course, that many times when those things happened, and they weren't often, they were the exceptions to the rule, but she had to handle all of those. And she was saying she felt that it was necessary and good to try and correct those things, or to make corrections, or to make tough situations better, or to listen to concerns. And she was always willing to do that. But she kind of shared with me how interesting it was to see that anytime, maybe on a snow day or when things would happen and the busing wasn't quite working right, the flood of emails and calls and things that would come in, and parents and others were so ready to tell them all the things that they got wrong, all the things that were awful. And she said more often they had days where everything went right, where things went smoothly, where coordinating all of that, if you think about coordinating all the work of coordinating the buses and routes and all those things, that's a huge thing to undertake. And she said, people were always so willing to call in on those rough days, but no one ever really called in to say thank you, or no one ever noticed and said, wow, that was a really smooth week you guys had. And not that she enjoyed her job and the service that she did, but she was just kind of pointing that out, how ready people are to acknowledge the negative and when things go wrong, and how no one really wants to acknowledge the positive or give a good affirmative statement when things go great. And I remember that conversation, and that really stuck with me. And I was thinking about it on a more personal perspective in my own life, the times when maybe it was so easy to ridicule or be negative, and I didn't take the time that I should have taken to be positive or to say a thank you. And so I think that definitely applies in the case when I'm talking about our elected officials. So that's the encouragement I want to give you today. Take the time, send an email or even a thank you card to an elected official that serves you and your family, and where you live. Be specific too. Let them know exactly what you appreciate or the things that you've noticed that they've done. And sometimes that takes a little research on our part. Sometimes that means we need to be a little more involved and aware of the things that are going on in our community, in our government, or in other places, to know and see all that they are really doing and being part of. And when I say that, when I say an elected official, that can be anyone from your US senator and congressman down to your county commissioner or mayor, or even to your school's PTA president or your HOA president. All of those are elected officials. So, any of them, some of them do get paid for the work that they do, and others do it completely voluntarily, or they don't really get paid much for the work that they do. But all of them could use a thank you note. And we could use the time to really kind of think about it and think about the good things that we are grateful for, the specific things that they've done for our community that we're thankful for. And just one more example and story to end on. So I live in Utah, and our party system runs on a delegate system where delegates are elected by their neighbors to represent them at the primary level, to take on and interview candidates, get to know candidates, and then at a convention to choose which candidate will be on the primary ballot for the election. And so I served as a delegate and a chair for my precinct for several years. And I did that partly. I wanted the experience and wanted to be involved. And also, there was a need. There weren't very many people stepping up to do it. And so I was ready to take on that for those years and for that time. And I remember a couple of times getting a thank you. I think they were both from people that had served as past delegates, so they were aware of the time that it took. And it was very simple. One just left a comment on a social media post I did that said, "Thank you for your time and service." And another was just a passing, "Oh, thank you for taking the time to do that." And that's all they were. They were very simple. But I remember they meant a lot. That meant a lot to me, because I was serving in those positions. They were completely volunteer. I wasn't getting paid for them. and they took time away from my home and family as I worked to talk and meet with different people and candidates, went to the different events, and then also took a couple full Saturdays to go to the different conventions and hear from the candidates and vote for those that I believed would best represent our precinct. So that was a simple experience for me, serving in government just in a very small way. But those simple thank yous meant a lot, and someone acknowledging the time that it took meant a lot to me. So that's my one last thought, is that your thank you does not have to be huge or complex. It can be simple, but it can mean a lot. So that's my thoughts for today on this July 4th that the episode is dropping. Take the time, thank an elected official. We need more recognition in our society of the positive, good things we are doing. And we can hold people accountable at the same time. Those are not exclusive of each other. And I think in the process, when we do that, it makes us all better citizens, more aware of those around us, and more ready to assist and step up when we need to do that as well. So take the time, thank an elected official, and also leave the podcast a review. So thank you so much for being here. I'll see you next time.